All right, so if we pick up example 3 here, we're going to do other types of intervals, which are, we did domain and range already, but now we're going to talk about positive and negative intervals. Then eventually we're also going to talk about increasing and decreasing intervals. The thing to keep in mind about these is these only use x values. So you're going to want to make a note of that. All the intervals we talk about today only say from one x to another x value. In fact, the only one that ever uses y values is range. So if you want to make yourself a little note just up here, we'll say range is the only interval that uses y. Okay, anything else we use, we're always saying from an x to an x. So whether we're talking domain, positive, negative, increasing, decreasing, all these new types of intervals we're going to talk about today use the x. Okay, so this example 3 here, it says, for what intervals is this function? So the function's x squared minus 9, and they graph it over here. You don't need to worry a ton about how to make this graph right now. We're going to learn that later on. For right now, you just realize, okay, this equation would make this graph if we were to graph it. We're fine just knowing that. It should say, for what intervals is this function positive, though? That word got left off. So when is this graph positive, and for what intervals is this graph negative, or this function negative? All right, so what does positive and negative mean? Positive and negative means when is the graph above the x-axis? So in this case, here's our x-axis. So this part of the graph right here is considered positive with a little plus sign. And this part of the graph would be considered positive because those two sections are both above the x-axis. That's what it means to be positive. So if we were going to write those as intervals, so I'm going to say positive intervals, and I'm just going to have to write two separate intervals. So we do have an arrow here, which means that this goes on to the left forever. So we'd say from negative infinity to 3 would represent this interval. So negative infinity to negative 3. That's the first positive interval. Anything within there, the graph is going to be positive. Every value from here going out, the graph's always above the x-axis. And then we're just going to write a second interval. So that's a little and sign there. This interval would be everything from 3 up to infinity. So anything from 3 and greater, this graph's also positive. So 3 to infinity. You'll notice I use parentheses on everything there. Okay, so remember how this works. We always use parentheses with infinity because you can never reach infinity, so we don't include it. But I used parentheses on the negative 3 and positive 3 because at negative 3, this graph's actually 0. So it's not positive, nor is it negative. It's neither. So that's why we're saying everything up to negative 3 and everything up to 3 there is positive. So that would be my positive interval. Now for the second question there, it says when is it negative? We're going to do the same concept, except now negative means when is it below the x-axis. So the part of this graph that's below the x-axis is this section right here. This part would be considered negative. And so all we have to do is say from what x value to what x value is that? That would be from negative 3 to positive 3. This graph is negative from that x to that x. So same thing, negative 3 to positive 3, and there we go. That'd be the negative interval. What you really have to get out of your head here is the y values don't matter. The fact that this goes down to negative 9, like cool, it goes down to negative 9, but that has nothing to do with our intervals. Our intervals are just the x values for which the graph is spanning. Any questions about those two concepts right now? So stick to your x values. That's what we're looking for. So different from positive and negative is increasing and decreasing. So there's still intervals. We're still only going to use x values. So like we said before, same rules apply here. But now we're talking about when is a function increasing, when is a function decreasing. This graph should have came on here, but it did not come printed on here. So we're just going to draw it. Again, you probably don't know how to draw this yet, so I'm just going to show you where it comes from. We learn how to draw it later. So put a dot at 2, or like y-intercept at 2. And then absolute value is a V-shaped graph. So we're going to do a downward V like this, going with like a rate of 1 or a slope of 1. So it's just going down 1, left 1. So going down like so. And then same thing here, going down 1, right 1 to make that V shape. So that graph, let's pretend that graph was already on there. So we're going to say that graph is already given to us. And then the question is, when is this function increasing and when is this function decreasing? That's what we're being asked here. So same style of question, but instead of positive and negative, now we're talking increasing and decreasing. Again, these are intervals. So we're going to write an increasing interval and a decreasing interval. So what do these words mean? Well, increasing means your function has a positive slope, or it's going upward. So you're looking for an upward trend, whereas for decreasing, you're looking for a downward or negative trend. So think of slope here. Think of rate of change. This graph starts off increasing. As you read it left to right, because we always read everything left to right, this graph is increasing. So it starts off increasing until it gets to right here, and then it switches to decreasing. Okay, so we just have to write those as intervals. So basically, we're going to go from negative infinity until 0, because again, we care about the x values. So from negative infinity to 0, this graph increases. Everything from the left all the way till we hit 0, this graph's going up. And then at 0 and on forever, this graph now decreases. So from 0 to infinity, it would be decreasing. So again, there you're looking at the slopes of the lines. What directions are they going there? This question doesn't ask it, but let's just pretend it did. What if this also asked for positive and negative? What would that look like on this graph? So if we wanted to also do positive and negative intervals, because we can do them on the same graph, they're separate from each other. This graph is positive, just this little kind of triangle part that's above. So from, in this case, from negative 2 to positive 2, this graph is positive. Negative 2 to positive 2. Only one segment, just that one little piece is the only time it's positive. It's negative twice, though. Remember, because it's below the x-axis here, and it's below the x-axis here. So we're going to have two negative intervals. Those would be from negative infinity to negative 2, and from 2 on to infinity for this part. So the point to make there is basically that when you're doing increasing and decreasing and positive and negative, they're all different kinds of intervals. So increasing and positive do not mean the same thing. Yeah, they both kind of sound like they might, but they are definitely different. Increasing and decreasing is about your slopes. Positive and negative is talking about, is it above or below the x-axis? And that's pretty much the pieces that we're going to talk about today. So just those four new kinds of intervals. Positive, negative, increasing, decreasing. That's what we're talking about there.